Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Well, as keen viewers of the channel will have noticed in the last couple of days, iRacing, they have released the IR-18, the 2018 IndyCar. Yes, finally IndyCar, after a turnaround period of about 6 years, has decided it's time for a new car. Of course, the DW12 by Dallara was introduced in the 2012 season, and unfortunately that car came just a little bit too late for one Dan Weldon. The new spec of the car was designed to limit the chances of a car getting airborne in the event of rubber-to-rubber contact in interlocking wheels, which of course that occurs quite frequently in IndyCar races, at least on ovals. Unfortunately, we lost the great Dan Weldon to an incident in which his car became airborne. However, the DW12, which was named in Weldon's honor, it did do its job. It limited the instances in which we saw cars getting airborne on the ovals, particularly from rubber-to-rubber contact. That was accomplished in part by placing the rather controversial and somewhat unsightly wheel fairings around the rear wheels on those cars. And, well, love them or hate them, IndyCar eventually said, you know what? It's time that we got back to basics. It's time that we got a proper open wheeler back again in American open wheel racing, and this is the result, the IR-18. The IR-18 does share many of its components, both externally and internally, with its DW12 predecessor. However, the IR-18 does feature a completely revamped aerodynamic profile, and this is the result. It's a really beautiful looking car, is it not? I definitely say so. You might notice on this car that we have substantially less topside aero going on. Gone are the multi-element front wings that we became accustomed to seeing on the DW12, particularly as the aero kits were developed over the last few years, and of course teams like Penske were able to develop those aero kits to quite significant gain. However, the IR-18 is approaching aerodynamics from a somewhat different philosophy. Topside aero, although still important and although still present here, is no longer nearly as important or no longer nearly as influential as bottom side or underbody aero. This car, for the first time in quite a while, features a very substantial underwing, IndyCar are calling it. For those of us more accustomed to Formula One parlance, it's a diffuser. It's a big diffuser. It's essentially two tunnels underneath the car, much like the ground effect days heralded by the Lotus 79, of course, at the end of the 1970s in Formula One. IndyCar has returned to the realm of ground effect for 2018, and this is a very significant development. I don't have exact figures on the downforce generation with this car, but I'm led to believe that over 50% of this car's downforce is not being produced by the front and rear wings that you can see there, but it is being produced by that under tray, which of course is operating on the principle of ground effect. So this could mean very good things indeed for racing in America, particularly on the ovals, as these cars finally will once again be able to follow closely nose to tail and not worry so much about the turbulent wake generated by the leading car, because the front wing, although yes, it's still there and it still is sensitive to turbulence, it's no longer nearly as important as it once was for these cars to generate peak downforce and therefore peak cornering loads. Be that as it may, here are the definite specs on the IR-18. It is 5,000 millimeters long, so exactly 5 meters long. For those of you measuring in US money, that is 196.9 inches. The width overall is 2,011 millimeters, just over 2 meters, so slightly wider than a Formula One car. That is 79 inches in old money. The front axle width, so the front track there on the front axle, that is 1,582 millimeters. You'll notice that the front wing does protrude slightly beyond the overall track of that front axle, so that is wider than the front axle, or that is 67 inches there in old money, 1700 millimeters, 67 inches. The rear axle track width, and this is interesting, is 1582 millimeters or 62 inches, so slightly narrower at the rear than it is at the front, talking about the axle width there, so that's interesting. The wheelbase is variable on these cars, although IndyCar is a spec formula, the teams do have some leeway in terms of setting the wheel wheelbase, interestingly enough, on their cars. So that ranges from anywhere between 3,023 millimeters or 119 inches to 3,073 millimeters or 121 inches. Of course, the teams would be able to vary that wheelbase slightly by adjusting the mounting pickup points for the rear suspension. Minimum weight. This is where things start to get interesting, particularly when we want to do the inevitable comparisons between IndyCar and Formula One. Minimum weight does vary depending on the type of circuit that the teams are visiting in a given weekend. For 1.5 mile speedways and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. By speedway, I mean an oval. The minimum weight on an oval and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway specifically is 721 kilograms or 1,590 pounds. This is lighter than a Formula One car in 2018. For everywhere else, this is short ovals, so ovals that are 1 mile or less in length, and road courses. That is all permanent circuits as well as street circuits. Minimum weight is 735 kilograms or 1,620 pounds. That is 1 kilogram heavier than a Formula One car in 2018. So we're now talking about a car that is dimensionally very similar to 2018 Formula One, and in terms of weight, it is lighter than a Formula One car on ovals for the most part, and it is 1 kilogram heavier than a Formula One car everywhere else. Quite interesting for performance comparisons. Fuel capacity in this car is 70 liters or 18.5 US gallons. The suspension arrangement here, it is a double wishbone push rod suspension front and rear. It does have a third heave spring front and rear as well as an anti-roll bar. So very similar to what Formula One cars are running, at least on the front end, double wishbone push rod. However, this car also has a push rod rear suspension, unlike Formula One where we are seeing pull rod ubiquitously up and down the grid. The transmission in this car, this is where things are a little bit more old school. It is a 6-speed paddle shift semi-automatic sequential. Formula One nowadays running those 8-speed units, IndyCar sticking with a 6-speed unit. Remember, this is a spec formula, so the components need to be mass producible, so they need to be homologated, and they also need to be reliable. So 6-speed semi-automatic sequential, of course actuated by paddles on the back of the steering wheel. Also, the clutch actuated by steering wheel mounted paddles, just like we see in Formula One. Brakes on this car quite similar to what we see in Formula One. They are specifically PFC carbon discs and carbon pads, and they run through monoblock aluminum calipers. Monoblock meaning that the calipers are machined from a single billet of aluminum, so there will be no shut lines, no seams, no welds or anything in the structure of the brake caliper proper. The engine, this is where the performance figures really start to drop off. The engine, it is a homologated 2.2 liter twin turbo V6 engine. 2.2 liters or 134.3 cubic inches. It is somewhat larger than a current Formula One engine at 1.6 liters, so 2.2 liters playing with here. Power output on that engine, both the Chevrolets and the Hondas, the two engine suppliers in IndyCar this year. Power output varies between 550 horsepower for your super speedways and 700 horsepower for your short ovals and all of your road courses, both permanent circuits and street circuits. That is where we are down on power in terms of comparing IndyCar to Formula One. Formula One, the top class of the field, so your Ferraris and Mercedes of the world, definitely producing over 1,000 horsepower. Here, the maximum power output, 700 horsepower. Of course, that output is mostly manipulated by adjusting the wastegate blow-off pressure there for the turbochargers. Maximum power 700 horsepower, assuming a road course. Maximum torque is about 300 pound-feet or 410 newton meters. So in terms of the engine and gearbox department, we are behind Formula One by quite a significant amount. But everywhere else, these cars are actually quite comparable, particularly when we're talking about the weight. However, enough technical jargon on this car. Today, we're going to be visiting two circuits, the first of which obviously is the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, Canada. IndyCar does not visit this circuit in the course of its championship. However, I do feel that it is quite representative of what we see in IndyCar in terms of the road courses. IndyCar, of course, visits permanent circuits as well as temporary street circuits. The Circuit Gilles Villeneuve here in Montreal, it is a permanent circuit, but it does have the characteristics of a street circuit. We have long straights, tight chicanes, and even a hairpin thrown in for good measure. So I do feel that it is representative of what we see in IndyCar. We do have the circuit to ourselves, and we do have the IR-18 here, of course, painted in the Ferrari Man blue, red, and gold livery, number 47. That's a tribute to my late grandfather. Anyway, let's get in this thing and see how it runs. First of all, let's go over the instrumentation that we have in the cockpit. IndyCar really have stepped up their game in terms of the electronics in 2018. The DW12, it had, yes, a very complicated multifunction steering wheel like we see in Formula One. However, it only had that single bar LCD screen there. You had gear position, you had shift lights, and that was about it. Teams were allowed to play with that a little bit, so just drivers, depending on which team they're driving for, might have had more or less information to go off of. But here, courtesy of Cosworth, IndyCar has a new electronics package and a new steering wheel. This, with that LCD monitor in the center, this is quite comparable to what we see in most Formula One cars nowadays, save for Williams, basically. We have that big LCD. It's showing us tons of information: fuel remaining, gear position indicator, lap count, lap time, lap delta, distance to car forward, distance to car behind, all of our settings for the engine controls, the engine map there, the fuel map, things of that nature, even gas mileage. Believe it or not, we do have a fuel economy reading there in this car. Quite interesting and actually quite important when it comes to fuel management, particularly in the longer oval races. Anyway, that about covers the instrumentation here in the cockpit. Additionally, on the screen, the iRacing HUD, we will have split times there on the left-hand side of the screen. Additionally to that, we have a gear, throttle, brake, and clutch indicator and a steering indicator, although you'll be able to see what I'm doing with the steering via the steering wheel in the cockpit. Without further ado, let's switch the car on and get out on the circuit. We'll punch up the pit lane speed limiter here. You see the LCD, it comes up with pit lane active and the border turns yellow. Blue lights flashing across the top there on the steering wheel to really hammer home the point that the pit limiter is on. First gear punched up, and we will pull away. I've turned the engine down here just so we can get out on track and bring the tires up to temperature gradually. We'll also have to worry about brake temperature somewhat. These are carbon brakes, so they do like to be hot. Get up and down through the box. Everything responding normally. Car feels fine. We'll start building temperature now. Let's turn the engine up as we go through the hairpin here, and we'll give it full revs coming out. Those of you who have played iRacing for quite some time, you will recognize the sounds in this car. They are identical in every way to the sounds that we heard on the DW12. There really have been no changes made to the engines in 2018. They're still those same Chevrolet or Honda 2.2-liter twin-turbo engines, so they do sound quite similar to how they have sounded for the last few seasons. However, from some external shots from real-world testing, I have heard a little bit more growl from these engines than perhaps we've heard in previous years. Quite a nice sound from IndyCar this year. We're still working on front axle temperatures. Not really able to attack the racetrack yet, but we are improving corner by corner. Snatching the front brakes there, still working on brake temps. just over these couple warm-up laps, you can see how the instrumentation is working in the cockpit. Shift lights across the top of the steering wheel, of course, green, yellow, red, and then the entire light bar turns blue when it's time to change up. You can see it quite well in your peripheral vision, and those of you running VR will definitely appreciate that as well. Cockpit mirrors are active. We can't really see them very well from this field of view, but of course in VR they would be a bit more useful. And we're starting to build some real tire temperature now so we can speak representatively about how the car feels. First, let's talk about the engine. It is that same 2.2 liter power unit that we are used to in IndyCar. And of course you can tell I'm a Formula One fan because I just said power unit, even though I hate the phrase. Yes, it's an engine. Let's keep it that way. But it is that same engine, either by Chevrolet or Honda. It's the second time I've made a mess of that complex. It feels exactly the same as it has felt in the DW12 because it is basically the same engine. Most of its power comes in the upper regions of the rev range, so really above 8,000 RPM. That's where it likes to be happy. It'll go all the way up to the fuel cut at 12,000 RPM. Most upshifts are happening between 11.6 and 11.8. So in terms of revs, we're about 800 RPM shy of Formula One. You'll notice the action on that 6-speed gearbox. It is not quite seamless. Nowhere nearly as fast as a Formula One gearbox, but it is still quick enough. There is an audible clunk when you get that fuel cut on the upshift. That's quite nice. And of course that's accompanied by some backfire effects from the external cameras. So you'll be able to see that on the external replays a little bit later on. Additionally, the downshifts, they are rev matched automatically, so you get an auto blip on the downshifts, as you can see there in the lower left. So there's no stabbing at the gas for us. It's all handled by the engine management. Because the engine is a bit peaky, in other words, the power comes in high in the rev range, you can get on the throttle pretty aggressively at a low speed corners and not worry too much. Yes, you can get wheel spin in this car, but it is somewhat difficult. Remember, the torque figure is a little bit low. It's certainly lower than an American stock car, and it's definitely lower than a Formula One car. Remember, Formula One cars with that hybrid powertrain, the engine coupled with an electric motor, so instant torque on demand. Not the case here. We have no hybrid systems to speak of, so it is just a straight-up turbocharged engine. Could you call that turbo lag? You can see just how I could nail the throttle out of that low-speed corner even before I'd straightened the car out completely. Is that turbo lag? It's hard to say. Perhaps a little bit. It is a twin-turbo setup, so turbo lag is going to be helped slightly just by virtue of it being twin-turbo. However, there is a little bit of lag and responsive time. I'm not quite sure if you could call it turbo lag specifically, but you do have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of your throttle application, so that's certainly welcome. Chassis dynamics. Well, you can see the car is tossable. You do feel the weight, but like I said, it is essentially exactly the same weight in the road course spec as a Formula One car. Therefore, it's quite familiar. By this point, we've been driving these heavier Formula One cars for about 4 years, so we're used to the weight by now. It feels quite similar in terms of overall chassis dynamics in the way of heave and weight transfer front and rear. Pretty manageable. Aerodynamics. Now, unfortunately, at a place like Montreal, we don't really have the opportunity to show at any high-speed corners because, well, we just have long straights and tight chicanes. However, that underbody really comes into its own through high-speed corners as well as, of course, on ovals, and we'll go to an oval next so you can see the underbody aerodynamics in action. Here on the road course, we are running the bigger wings, of course, so we do have a bit more topside aero helping us, but on the ovals, this car is almost 100% ground effect, which is really, really cool. It's a big lockup. How do the brakes feel? Well, as you can see there, they're quite touchy. You're almost never fully down on the pedal. Only right at the beginning of the braking zone from a high-speed section are you at full brakes. Immediately you start to ramp off of them in that cadence braking technique, as you're all quite used to from Formula One cars, so that's really not much to get used to. I will say the brakes are quite grabby. It's easy to lock the front axle, and once it does lock, it's kind of hard to get it to start rolling again. So it does take a little bit of feel, but the overall braking technique, quite similar to what we're already used to. The tires, it's those Firestone Firehawks. I can't quite speak in a representative fashion about the tires because the iRacing tire model, it's quite different from what we're used to in Assetto Corsa, for example. It's very unforgiving. The slip angles on these slick tires, very narrow. You have a very small margin of error when it comes to getting the tail out. What I find, generally speaking, in iRacing, and it's not just specific to this car, when you do get the tail out, if you don't react to it almost instantaneously, you're going to spin, and there's nothing you can say about it. That's more of an iRacing thing in the way that they do their tire model. But they do have a lot of grip, provided you don't overstep the slip angle, so they do perform in a representative fashion of what you'd expect a racing slick to be. Coming down the straight here, what is the steering like? How's the force feedback feel? Well, through my Thrustmaster TSPC, and I'm running the Ferrari F150 rim, feels good. These cars do not have power steering, therefore you do feel all the bumps and shakes and curbing effects a little bit more intensely than you do in a Formula One car. And that's also quite welcome because these cars really do have a sense of hunkering down into the tarmac. They do have a sense of leaning on the tires quite significantly, and you can feel all that information through your steering. Of course, all of this is going to depend rather significantly on your hardware as well as on your software setup, but from where I'm sitting, this feels very good. I do like strong force feedback. I like a heavy steering weight. This car playing right into my hands, no pun intended. Braking point slightly, I rescued it. In terms of top speed, we are running quite a bit of downforce on this car. We could probably trim it out a bit, but 173, 174 miles an hour there is about all it'll do. Of course, if you really want to trim it out, particularly for ovals, it will easily do over 200 miles an hour, but in the road course spec where you've got to get it stopped pretty quickly, you won't really see them running too much faster than that in a straight line. That's par for the course in IndyCar. These cars are so diverse, the venues that they have to go to are so diverse that despite them being spec cars, they really do have to be extremely adaptable because IndyCar, they're visiting super speedways, normal speedways, so long ovals and short ovals, permanent road circuits, temporary street circuits, and these same cars from 1 week to the next have to completely adjust their character in order to suit the demands of a particular venue. So really, to design a car like this and to make it coherent and cohesive is no mean feat. Dallara, they have done a really good job with it. straight, approaching the rev limiter, 175 miles an hour. Braking quite hard there. Tail out a little bit there on exit. The car will do it. Doesn't particularly like it, but it will happen. One thing that surprised me about this car when I first drove it was how late you can actually brake. I suppose because the minimum weights now are quite comparable between Formula 1 and IndyCar, you can actually brake pretty much at your Formula 1 braking points in a lot of corners. For example, when I drove the car at Imola, I was surprised braking into Tamburello and braking in exactly the same place in the Ferrari SF70H. So that was quite a nice surprise. That was pleasant for me. Now, of course, we can go in a different direction with that and say, well, Formula 1, why are they making the cars so heavy now that they're braking at the same point as you do in an IndyCar? But I don't know. Different commentary for a different day. I am definitely enjoying this, though, and I think if any of you have yet to drive the IR-18, you'll definitely enjoy it as well. One thing that I'm really hoping for, though, is that this car breathes some new life into the iRacing IndyCar Road Series Championship. A couple of years ago, I was a regular in that series, finished on the podium a few times. Remember at Watkins Glen, I had a second place there, finished third at Charlotte a couple of times. It was fun, and I'd really like to see more people driving in the IndyCar Road Series in iRacing. It became my poison of choice for quite a few months there in 2016, and I hope that we get back there. We've gotten fairly long into this stint now. The tires are starting to get some wear in it. You will notice there's a bit more understeer now than there had been previously. But for the most part, still pretty tractable, still manageable. Car's not really doing anything too rambunctious by any means. There's no snap oversteer or anything of that nature. It's all quite tractable and predictable. You do have to be quick. You do have to react to it, but it's all pretty reasonable, and if you've got open wheel experience, particularly on road courses as well as on ovals, you'll be fine. If you're not particularly well versed in oval driving like myself, do 40-50 laps or so, you'll start to figure it out, no problem. Starting to run down on fuel. 2.7 gallons remaining. I can tell you that exactly because the steering wheel shows it to me. I really like that. And I can even tell you our fuel economy here on average, 2.9 miles per gallon on that previous lap. laps of fuel left, says the spotter. And 1 corner of driving to go, says the driver, because we're going to pull into the pit lane. Turn the engine back. Punch up the limiter. And here, pit lane speed limit 40 miles an hour. As you can see, the car is settled in nicely at a very pedestrian 39. Let's take the opportunity to practice a pit stop. Not seeing animated pit crews here, but the tires have been swapped over, as you can see. And there it is, pit stop complete. We'll switch the car off. And just the last bit of instrumentation there. When I first switched the car off, you saw the red border come up on the LCD, and it said FP low. That's fuel pressure low. Obviously, the fuel pump will have switched off, and there'd be no more fuel pressure. Now it says EOP low, engine oil pressure low. So really, I appreciate how iRacing have emulated the instrumentation in this car. It's very, very cool, and it's quite representative so far of what we've been seeing from the IndyCar visor cameras, which I really hope we see more of throughout the 2018 season. And Formula One, get your act together. We need visor cameras, especially if you're going to make us try to look at the drivers through this halo monstrosity. Visor cams, please, and thank you, Liberty Media. Anyway, that covers our road course / street course review of the IR-18. However, we do have to take this car on an oval, and we will go to an oval next. Stick around. Welcome to an oval, or should I say welcome to a triangle. We are at Pocono Speedway here in Long Pond, Pennsylvania, and this is a really cool place for me to be able to go on a sim because this is what I consider to be my home circuit. It's about 2 hours away from where I live in New Jersey, and, well, I've driven here. I had a go in a Formula 2000 car here in June of 2017, and it was a really cool experience. So I know this place pretty well. I've also attended an IndyCar race here, so yeah, I'm familiar with the circuit. I know the atmosphere. I know where to go to see all the great shots for the cameras and everything. So yeah, it's a really cool place, a place I like a lot, so why not take this car here to show you how it runs on an oval. Yes, this place, yes, it's a triangle. However, we do have 3 very distinct corners. They're not all identical corners. They do vary somewhat in their camber as well as their length, so it's not necessarily a straightforward affair going around this place, even from one lap to the next. So it's a cool test for this car. You will notice, there's a reason why we're looking at the car from the rear here. You see the rear wing is almost essentially gone. The only little vestige of a rear wing that we have here is a single main plane with 2 wingtip elements there downturned at about 70-80 degrees toward the ground. There's no more end plates, there's no more double element rear wing there. We've just got that more so spoiler than wing appendage there at the rear. The front wing has also been trimmed out quite significantly for the oval spec, and it's running at 0 degrees right now. So it's just a flat plane there presented to the onrushing airstream. All of the car's downforce generation is now happening from the undertray and the undertray alone. So this is where that underwing, as IndyCar call it, will really come into its element. Let's get in. So, the cockpit unchanged, of course, because the car is still exactly the same, but the handling dynamics will have changed significantly. Getting out onto the racetrack here at Pocono, approaching turn 1. Turn the engine way down, of course. However, we will turn it up in a moment into 4th gear, 145 miles an hour already. And you can see just how wide this place is. One thing that really is not conveyed too well on television is the scale of this place. You could be standing at turn 1, for example, and you can't even really see turn 3. That's how immense this place is. The infield is home to a campground, several very large parking facilities. Just everything you can imagine is crammed into this place. It's enormous. Turn the engine up, 4th gear now, 11,000 revs, 200 miles an hour has come and gone. 5th gear, much wider gearing, of course, here on an oval. And turn 1, we do have to lift off into turn 1. There's 215 miles an hour, still accelerating. Still in 5th gear. Flat for turn 2, no problem. Got to build tire temperatures a bit. A short shoot into turn 3. Just barely flat there. And now, turn 4? No, what turn 4? That was start finish. Those of you who got the reference, congratulations. Turn 1. Back it down. 5th gear. Working on exit. There we go. Up to the wall. Turn 2. Flat if you dare. Not quite daring. Rear end got a little bit skaty there. On the turn 3 approach. Yeah, gotta lift a bit. Tires are giving up. The tricky triangle, as they call it. Yeah, it is a bit tricky. It is not a straightforward affair, as we said. Lots of understeer. You know, there's nothing quite like getting understeer at 200 plus miles an hour, heading you into a steel barrier if you don't catch it to wake you up in the morning. That I will say. Popping 6th gear there right at the end to start finish. It sounds kind of dumb, but believe it or not, that's how these guys actually run this place. I remember sitting in the main grandstand on practice day on the Saturday before the 2017 race, and I was really surprised to hear these guys hitting the rev limiter at the end of the straight before popping 6th gear. So yeah, they're coming down start finish in 5th gear, and they're also doing the majority of the lap in 5th gear. It's flat out when you've really got the car hooked up well. We obviously don't have it hooked up so well today, but yeah, you could just see the effects there of that understeer and having to pedal it, as we Americans say, through the middle part of the corner. Turn 2, flat if you dare. That was flat that time. And turn 3, can we keep it down to the yellow line? Yes, just. See just how wide this place is. Start finish is 90 feet wide. It's to put that into perspective, that's as wide as the Titanic was. So this is an enormous place. Television, I don't think it does a good job of conveying the scale of this circuit, as I have said. It's really impressive when you see it in person. Staying flat, yes. We've really got the car hooked up now, at least through turn 3. Turn 1 is a bit of a nightmare. Try to keep it to the yellow as long as you can. And turn 2, this is really impressive. If you get the opportunity during the IndyCar race to stand in the infield there and watch them just pummel their way through turn 2, it's a sight. These guys are going flat out 215 miles an hour or so. If you blink, you miss it. It's really an exciting thing to see. Of course, when you drive into the circuit, there's a tunnel underneath turn 2 that gets you into the infield, and yeah, it's impressive. Anyway, how's the car feeling around this oval? Well, there's definitely some understeer that's apparent in turns 1 and 3. Turn 2 that we just went through is completely flat. Turn 3, trying to stay down to the yellow line. We're a little high, gotta back out a bit. Those of you who haven't really given oval racing a chance, I definitely understand how you feel. For the longest time, I just categorically rejected all forms of oval racing, NASCAR and IndyCar. It just didn't do it for me, but that changed when I drove at this place. It really opened my eyes to just how dynamic an oval can be, and then when I went to the IndyCar race, I was quite impressed. So I've had a bit of a change of heart in the last year. Whoa, okay, that was that was a pucker factor. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. Puckering has occurred. Change of underpants ordered for Mr. Kricko, shall we? Yes. Don't put the left side wheels below the yellow line. Just don't do it. See, most of the time there's grass there or some pretty high curbing, so it's not really advantageous. But if you do get the opportunity to put the left side wheels below the yellow line, just pass it up. Trust me. Yep, tires are going off now. Lots of understeer. Of course, you do have the weight jacker in this car to help you with that cross weight. That basically is a hydraulic strut that you can adjust the pressure of while you're in the car, and that will certainly do a number for helping your understeer or oversteer condition as you're going around. In the pit lane here. Water temp a little high, 230 and coming down now. What we will do now is go into the setup screen and show you a little bit about what's going on. Some of this stuff may look quite foreign to you if you're a Formula One fan and only a Formula One fan. Let's shut things up for a moment. All right, so here is your setup screen showing you what's going on with this car. And yeah, you can see these tire pressures, they're really high. They're quite comparable to what you'd probably be running in your road car right now, but you can see the pressure difference from left to right. That's 7 psi different. Right side versus left side. Of course, we're only turning left, so you want the car to be canted slightly toward the left so it turns a little bit harder, so that accounts for the tire pressure difference. You can also see the tire temperatures. Look how hot those right side tires are getting. 242 Fahrenheit. That's hot. That's well over 100 degrees C. Front aero single plane front wing. No end fences there. We are running a slight wicker, but the wing angle, look at this, minus 0.62 degrees. Yeah, that means that the main plane of the wing is actually pitching up relative to the incoming airstream. Body aero, we've closed down the radiators a bit. That's for lower drag. You really only want to run that in qualifying because water temperatures did get a little bit high. So for reliability, you'd want to open that up a little bit for the race. Diffuser, the sidewall on and the strakes are on. Therefore, we are sealing that diffuser, really creating that ground effect sequence going on there. Rear aero, main plane there, single plane, and also it is pitched up by 4.5 degrees. Really interesting. Totally far into a Formula One type setup. Chassis, the wheelbase, we're running the long wheelbase, 121 inches there. Brake pressure, you don't really need brakes here, so medium there. Who cares about the brakes really? Steering offset, yes, you'll notice that we're pulling slightly to the left as we're going down the straight, so I've got to turn the wheel ever so slightly to the right to counter that. That only helps you turn left, of course. And then, of course, all of the corner weights. You can see just how much we have got this car jacked over to help that left side can't happen here as we're going into those left-hand corners. You can see the cross weights here on the car. 359 pounds to the left front, but then 499 to the right front, and then on the rears we got 525 to the left rear and 473 to the right rear. So again, the name of the game here is to get the car to turn left. Go fast, turn left is what they say. Our damper settings here, again, all asymmetrical for the most part here. Yes, they are actually all asymmetrical in our damper settings here, front and rear. And then the drivetrain, you can see that we have got this car geared out for maximum speed, as you can see. Turbo pressure here. This is not available. At the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, at very least, we have the opportunity to adjust the wastegate blow-off pressure there. So at Indy, we can see top speeds of over 230 miles an hour, particularly in the draft. And at Pocono here, not so much. But really, it's a foreign kind of thing. If you're not used to running ovals, and I'm not particularly used to running ovals, I mean, I've run several races here on iRacing on ovals, but it's still not my first instinct. It's kind of foreign, but really, it takes some getting used to, but it's an impressive thing once you understand how it works. Getting back onto the track now. We'll do a couple more laps in this thing. It's as you could probably tell, it's kind of taking the words out of my mouth, but it's fun. It really is. Tires, yep, flat out. Turn 3, cold tires. Easy flat, that's nice. It's gonna be a quick lap here. As close to the wall as we dare. Getting that side draft effect going on. Turn 1. Ah, man, I dropped it again below the yellow line. Don't do that. The fact that I haven't crashed into that outside barrier now on 2 occasions, that is quite something, I must say. Close to that wall as we dare. That is what they call the safer barrier. It is a steel outer skin. It's similar to Armco, but then immediately behind that very thin Armco sheeting is styrofoam, believe it or not, a polystyrene foam. And it serves as a crushable structure to absorb a lot of that impact energy. Rather than the car absorbing a lot of that impact, the wall itself does. And it just takes those impact forces away from the driver, and it does make a safer barrier. In days of old, these outside barriers were mostly concrete, and some of them were steel, just non-crushable steel, much like you'd see on highway guardrails, and we did get a lot of drivers injured in those high-speed crashes. So driver injuries, unfortunately, they are still a thing, and I think they always will be a thing, particularly in oval racing, just because of the high speeds and the close proximity to the barriers, but things really have improved significantly over the years in terms of driver safety on ovals. That's a 41.801. Out of it, get out of it, get out of it. You see, when it does start to push up high, as your NASCAR guys might say, you really got to make a decision really fast. There's barely enough time to assess the situation. Rule of thumb, get out of the throttle. Sometimes you gotta talk to your car around this place. Water temp up at 244 Fahrenheit. It's well above boiling. Of course, it is under pressure, so it won't be boiling quite yet, but it's getting there. We are running a bit too hot for my comfort in a race situation, but here it doesn't matter so much. Just a demo run, of course. Getting 4 miles per gallon. That does sound somewhat counterintuitive, does it not? As I very nearly brushed the wall there. We did not hit it for the record. But think about this. On a road course, you're stopping and starting all the time. You're changing gear a lot. You're accelerating from low speeds up to high speeds and then braking and then doing it all again. Around an oval, your speed is far more consistent, far more constant than it is on most road courses. So fuel economy is going to go up. We've improved by about 50% over what we were doing in Montreal. Water temps are high but stable, 244 degrees, 245. A very different approach into turn 1, that didn't work at all. 5 laps of fuel left, says the spotter. Yeah, turn 1, it's now it's just playing with us. worked. As you can probably tell, some ovals really do have the ability to get you carried away. They really force you to focus in. You kind of get tunnel vision sometimes. And just remember, normally you'd be running with 25 other cars, so you can't afford to have tunnel vision. Most of the time, racing on ovals, your eyes are on stalks. You're constantly thinking about what the guys around you are doing. Of course, you'll have your spotter helping you as well, but really, you have to maintain situational awareness. It's very much like driving on an interstate highway or a very large motorway for my European audience, where you've got high speeds continuously for quite an appreciable distance. You really do have to just watch the people around you more so than how you watch where you are going. Same sort of mentality in oval racing. Oil temp at 260, that's a bit high. Water temp at 245, that's a bit high. Again, the engine's really not in danger of failing by my estimation, but it is a bit hotter than I would like. However, we are going to be peeling off into the pits here because we've got about 1 lap of fuel left in this car. Even at this low fuel, though, it feels stable. We do have that understeer, but that's down to setup more so than fuel load. And there we are, beloved audience. That is the 2018 Dallara IR-18. This is your IndyCar open wheeler for the 2018 season and beyond, as far as we know, probably for the next 5 or 6 years. IndyCar does have some developments planned for this car. I know that the teams are going to be able to play with aero kits this season, and that will probably expand a bit in seasons to come. Additionally, IndyCar are also trialing their own version of cockpit head protection. However, they are not going to use the halo because sight lines at an oval, in other words, a place like Pocono, they don't work the same as they do on road courses, and they would need a solution that could be applied to the cars on road courses as well as on ovals. Halo doesn't work. Therefore, IndyCar are trying to use the aero screen, basically a windscreen, and Scott Dixon has already tested this at Phoenix Motor Speedway, that is an oval, and he has given it good reviews. So this car likely to feature some form of cockpit head protection in the future, maybe even the near future, maybe even in 2018. But for the moment, it is still 100% open cockpit. But really, I'm very impressed with what IndyCar and Dallara have been able to collaborate with here on this IR-18, because really, I think it's a fantastic car in terms of the specs, in terms of chassis dynamics and the weight and the overall dimensions of everything. Very comparable to a 2018 Formula One car. Engine power, no, definitely not. We're about 300 horsepower down from the average of the Formula One field. Of course, teams like Ferrari and Mercedes this year definitely are over the 1,000 horsepower mark over in Formula One. But here, 700 horsepower on the road courses and 550 or so horsepower for the super speedways such as Pocono. But really, I have nothing but praise for this car. It's been a lot of fun so far. I can't wait to go race it. Like I said, I hope that it breathes life into the IndyCar Road Series here on iRacing, and I know that I'm going to have to try my hand at the Indy 500 in May here on iRacing. It's just a lot of fun so far, this car, and I mean, I've only really done single car shakedown tests, but I am in love, guys, really. And IndyCar this year, with the season starting this weekend at St. Pete down in Florida, IndyCar is going to be very exciting indeed in 2018, and I can't wait to watch all of the proceedings. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with views of hot laps from Montreal as well as here at Pocono. I do thank you all very much for your continued support and your continued engagement. And also, a note on the Assetto Corsa side of the world, VRC are working on an IndyCar mod, both of the 2012 Dallara DW12 and of this car, the IR-18. I don't have an ETA on that mod, but I do know that VRC are working diligently on it, and of course, we all know what to expect from those guys. So eventually, we will be able to drive this car in Assetto Corsa as well as in iRacing, but for the moment, it is an iRacing exclusive, and it is available through the iRacing client for the traditional price of $11.95 US. So certainly, if you can get your hands on it, get your hands on it because it is glorious. I love it. I love it on the road courses, and I love it on the ovals. Do stay tuned for me doing some testing at Indianapolis because I do want to try my hand at the Indy 500 this year here in iRacing. And of course, this is the car that we will be running. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very much for watching, and we will see you soon.